Well, thank you for everyone for joining the webinar. We can get underway. We're a community that spans the globe. I'm really grateful for the opportunity to be able to share ideas and learn more about what's going on out there. Just before we get underway, I'd like to draw your attention to a couple things here with the technology. You'll see a tab for asking questions and responding to polls during the presentation. Go ahead and respond, and we'll do our best, just depending on the volume of questions. James, I'll interrupt to answer, otherwise we can pick them up at the end of the presentation. And you'll also see something there for polls. So I think 2 or 3 points during the presentation, James will ask for input to the group, and that'll help us as we go through. So please respond by all means. Just before we get underway, I'll introduce myself and the presenter. My name is Charles Hamer. My company provides software to schedule work orders in a CMMS backlog. You'll find our tech around the globe at enterprises like Bayer, Cargill, and Tesla. This software helps by bringing together all of the information a scheduler would need to create a weekly schedule, and it provides some metrics to measure success. The software is called Sockeye, and there's contact information at the end of the presentation if you're interested in learning more. But I'd like to introduce James Kovacevic, who's our presenter today. James has been advising maintenance leadership at leading enterprises like the Spaceship Company, Schlumberger, and Weyerhaeuser for over 15 years. James is able to help improve maintenance efficacy and overall performance. He is CMRP, MMP, and CAMA certified. And James also hosts a Rooted in Reliability podcast and is the principal instructor at Prioritization, an educational consultancy firm headquartered aboard the USS North County, Charleston, South Carolina. James, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, thank you, Charles. Well, welcome everyone. So today we're going to talk about scheduling, one of everyone's favorite topics in maintenance and reliability. We're going to talk about some of the constraints within scheduling, some of the things that may not be working, and some of those things that you may be able to put in place to make sure scheduling makes a step change in your organization and you really get the full value of the planning and scheduling process. Now, I often refer to maintenance scheduling as herding sheep. And at best it's herding sheep. At worst, it's trying to herd cats. And I'll give you a scenario I lived through, and we'll see if this resonates with any of you. So I was involved in creating a shutdown plan that involving all different departments, all different functions within the organization. So we started this scheduling for this outage 3-4 months in advance. We were building the timelines, defining the critical paths, doing all those things you're supposed to do as a scheduler. Time comes up and we're going to execute that outage. Well, the maintenance crew comes in on midnights, works really hard. They're able to tear apart a piece of a critical asset that was on the critical path of the outage, and they go home at the beginning of the day. Well, at some point during that day, logistics had arranged for someone to come in and do some painting on the floors. Well, when that crew came back again on that midnight shift, the entire floor was painted with fresh epoxy, delaying us for about 72 hours before we could get in and do some repairs on that equipment again. So that in turn delayed the entire schedule by 72 hours. Now, some of you may have experienced something like this, and that's what scheduling is. It's really herding sheep at best. But it's not just scheduling that does this. It's the coordination between departments, it's improper planning, it's a lot of different things that led to that issue and probably leads to a lot of the issues you guys experience on a day-to-day basis with your in-plant scheduling. So let's talk about what this may look like. But before we do, if we can kick off the poll, I'd like to understand what CMMSs are you using? Because scheduling is very, very different in each one of the major CMMSs and many of the smaller CMMSs. So if we could go ahead and launch that poll, that would be
Launch should be up there.
Yep, poll is open, so if you can go ahead and just put in what CMMS you're using.
Looks like James, just to pipe in here, about 30% of the participants are running SOP, a quarter are running Maximo, 10% or so of Oracle, and 36% of other.
All right, excellent. So those of you running SAP, my condolences. I know how difficult that can be, but there are ways to work within SAP to make scheduling work easily, efficiently, and so on and so forth. All right, so now we understand what CMMSs are being used. Want to give you something to think about. So when we talk about planning and scheduling, do you plan and do you schedule? And are they distinct, separate activities? Now I want you to really think about that. So planning is the act of developing job plans, developing scope of work, estimating time, those sorts of things. Where scheduling is aligning those job plans with resources, asset availability, and so on and so forth. Now, if you're only scheduling, you're not developing those job plans, you're not building those bill of materials, you're not doing those things, you're not going to get as much value out of scheduling as you should. So for those of you that have planners and schedulers in place, think about, are you really getting as much out of this planning and scheduling program as you think you should be? Now, all right, so what's not typically working in a planning and scheduling program? Well, according to a recent study by Assetivity, about 86% of organizations do not feel that their programs deliver value. Additionally, 72% of those organizations feel they have the right skills and capabilities to make planning and scheduling work. So why is that happening? Why are organizations not getting the value out of planning and scheduling? Well, typically it comes down to one of three things. The planners aren't actually planning. They're spending their time as fill-in supervisors. They're scheduling all the time, not actually planning jobs. No, the technicians the planners may be doing good job plans. They're handing them out as part of that work package, but the technicians aren't following those job plans. So we're not getting consistent results. We're not getting consistent labor hours for each job, and those sorts of things. Then we also have within the scheduling process, it's not scheduling the right work when it's needed. So the prioritization of work isn't occurring properly. Now, does this sound like your planning and scheduling function? In the above three, about 2/3 of these are related to planning, and about 1/3 is related to scheduling. So we're going to focus on the 1/3 related to scheduling, which is the scheduling process is not scheduling the right work when it is needed. The other two, those are related to planning, and that's a whole nother topic. But if you guys have questions regarding it, please feel free to type it in the chat or reach out to me after, and we can have a conversation around those. So, according to maintenance planning and scheduling guru Doc Palmer, planning takes about 2/3 of the time of a planner scheduler, but only yields about 1/3 of the benefits. Scheduling takes about 1/3 of the time, but yields about 66% of the benefits. But you can't properly schedule without having good job plans and labor estimates in place. If every one of your work orders is 1 hour or 4 hours, you're not really scheduling properly because you don't have accurate labor estimates. This is why scheduling will typically only provide those 66% of the benefits once you have planning in place and you're driving the right job plans. You're eliminating the waste or inefficiencies of maintenance through kitting, having the right information on the work order, those sorts of things. So only once you have planning in place is when you should really focus on scheduling. But once you are able to start scheduling because you have good plans in place, you'll experience a reduction in planned downtime. You'll take less time to do the same amount of PMs, do the same amount of corrective work. You'll get a reduction in unplanned downtime. With good job plans comes reduced maintenance-induced failures, reduced infant mortality, reduced improper installation and rework. You'll also get a reduction in overtime. Since we're more efficient with our time, because we have good planning and scheduling in place, we'll be able to drive down overtime. But why is it so complicated? Why is maintenance scheduling so complicated? Well, typically, it's more than just assigning work to technicians. It's a coordination of people, materials, equipment, tools, and downtime in a prioritized manner in alignment with the organizational goals. It's not just trying to cram as much work as possible, it's making sure it's the right work with the available resources. In most organizations, there's usually more work than available man hours. We don't have enough people to do all the work we want to get done, so we have to prioritize properly. That leads to the inability to reduce all that maintenance work into planned outages. So you have to, once again, go back to prioritization. What work am I going to do now? Which work can I push? And understanding what the failure modes you're addressing with that, the repairs or preventative work as well. Poor communication is also a major complication in planning and scheduling. And that communication is not just within maintenance and operations and aligning outage dates, but it's also within the maintenance organization itself. The planners to the storeroom, the planners to the supervisors, feedback from the craft. Those are all major issues from poor communication that leads to improper scheduling. Then we have improper prioritization. And most organizations I work with, they prioritize their work on the squeaky wheel gets the grease. Now, that's not the right way to do things. We definitely need a defined prioritization process, and we'll walk through a few of those in a little bit. And then lastly, there's not a defined scheduling process. There's no 4-week, 1-week daily scheduling process that allows us to manage the exceptions and not the norm. As a result, we're scrambling to build that schedule in the last minute. So this is where the 5 levels of maintenance scheduling come in. But before we jump into that, Charles, if you can launch the next poll, I want to look at how are you currently scheduling? Are you using Excel? Are you using a straight table output from SAP or something of that nature? If you can go ahead and answer that poll, and then we'll get started on the 5 levels.
It's just like watching election night, James, here, but here we go, just about. We will close poll, show results. Can you see that, James?
I cannot see the results, so if you can read them off.
Half of the respondents are using Excel, 23% are using CMMS, 3% are using Outlook, 6% are using a visual calendar, and 16% are using something else. And we had about 3/4 of the people responded.
Excellent. So a wide variety of different tools used to manage the scheduling. And you know, if you're not using one of those internal CMMS functions or some other tool that's directly integrated with the CMMS, you have a lot of issues with data transfer back and forth. You're exporting into an Excel template you built, and then you got a lot of stuff you got to do once it's in there. So generally, a bolt-on or the existing CMMS functionality is the greatest, although sometimes the existing CMMS functionality is not the right tool to facilitate this. And by facilitate this, I mean the 5 levels of scheduling. So the 5 levels of scheduling is a systematic approach to take your planned, preventative, predictive maintenance, lubrication, those sorts of things, and your corrective work or project work, and build it into a sustainable program that allows you to manage the exceptions and not the norm. So let's start with the 52-week at a high level, and this is just your estimated resource requirements at a very high level. This level, we're not talking about individual work orders, we're just talking about workloads based on trade or group or that sort of thing. From there, we're going to cascade into the 16-week level, and that is where the first point within the scheduling process that you may see a work order number or an individual work order. Here, we're going to kind of have a high level of what's going on strategically within 3 to 4 months of the organization, start talking about outages, those sorts of things. From there, it goes to the 4-week level, and this is where our scheduling really starts to come together and building a 4-week, 3-week, 2-week, 1-week schedule. From there, we get to the 1-week schedule, and that's just literally a snippet of the 4-week schedule. And then from there, we're going to do the micro scheduling, the individual to the work order to the day. Now, each of these levels have a specific purpose and utilizes unique activities to make scheduling sustainable. By focusing on these different levels, the organization can develop a consistent approach and allows them to focus on the right work at the right time. It is important to note that all these here are not published schedules. They're estimates and a work in progress within the CMMS, from the 52-week to the 4-week schedule. Once it's a 1-week schedule, then that's when we're going to finalize and publish our schedule and measure our performance that way. Typically, we measure our plan scheduling performance based on that 1-week schedule that we're currently on. So let's talk about these a bit more deeper. So the 52-week schedule is the highest level of the scheduling process. This is the foundation of the scheduling process, and if it's not set up correctly, the rest of the scheduling process will be a little bit difficult to manage. The 52-week schedule allows us to set up the process so we're focusing on the exceptions and not the norm. And what I mean by that is it lays out the strategic plan for the year. How many weeks of shutdown or outages will we have? When will the weekend outages or one-day outages be? We're going to identify rough order of magnitude of what those are. We're also going to plug in our high-level forecast of recurring work, our preventative maintenance activities, our predictive maintenance activities, overhauls, inspections, calibrations, all those things that we're expected to perform over the course of a year. We're going to lay that out in that 52-week schedule. Now, keep in mind that the 52-week schedule does not have a detailed list of work orders. We're only working off resource capacities at this point. It's not a defined, locked-in schedule for the year. These outages will float a bit. What it's doing, it's allowing us to understand what available time we're going to have, what are the demands on our crew, and allow us to kind of level load that, which we'll get to next. Now, when I was a planner working at one organization, this is what our PM workload looked like. Some weeks we had way more hours than we had available, and other weeks we had almost nothing. It was not a pretty picture. So the first week of each month, I spent juggling the preventative maintenance routines into different weeks to make sure we could get them done. Now, that's managing the norm. We don't want to do that because it takes a lot of time to figure out when can I squeeze this in this week or next week or third week or fourth week. Right? What we needed to do is we really needed to get this down to a consistent level. Right? That allowed us to truly make decisions on if overtime should be ran, if we can delay work, those sorts of things. But having a schedule like this for just your planned or preventative or predictive maintenance activities isn't the way to go. So what we did is we did a level loading. We're able to level load the work to a consistent level for the most part across the year. So here we minimized a lot of the coordination issues with operations. We minimized the variation in our planned recurring work. This enabled us to work with operations to say, here's how many hours we need down for this asset or this process or this line each week, because we level loaded the PMs, not just against the trade, mechanics, electricians, and so on and so forth, but also the individual assets and lines. This really allowed us to make a step forward in terms of joint cooperation with operations. Previously, when we had that highly variable schedule, 1 week we wouldn't need any time, the next week we'd need 24 hours, and so on and so forth, and they found that very hard to accommodate. By level loading our work, we were able to say we need 4 hours each week for this line, and they were able to accommodate that in their schedule. The other advantage to this, once we were able to get this done, was having a nice consistent level workload. We were able just to know we had 250 hours we could plan each week for corrective and project work. It made the prioritization and the management of all that corrective work that much easier. Now, on the downside, level loading your existing preventative and predictive work is time consuming. It does require extensive communication with the production and planning group to align outage dates, requirements, those sorts of things. But it's definitely worth the effort. It doesn't have to be perfect where everything is consistently at a number, but you want to get it to as close as level as possible. That just allows you to start managing the exceptions only and not the norm. From there, we went into the 16-week schedule. And from here, this is a short-term strategic plan. What we're going to do at this point, we're going to start to lock in those outage dates, maybe not the exact times, but the dates, or at least the week that it's going to occur. And at this level 2 is when we're going to start seeing actual work order numbers. Now, this 16-week schedule is built as work is prioritized during the daily prioritization meetings, which we'll get to in a moment. Since we have all planned recurring work, preventative, predictive work, already level loaded, it'll show up on the schedule with specific work order numbers. At this point, we're going to begin to align the maintenance schedule with the operational schedule, establishing, as I mentioned, what specific days or weeks we're going to get those assets and those processes. We're going to finalize, the shutdown, turnaround, outage dates, those sorts of things. From week 5 to 16, depending on where it is, you'll have anywhere from 30 to 60% of your capacity planned as you fill it with projects, longer term corrective work, and your proactive work, your preventative and predictive maintenance activities. The planner primarily focuses here because they're going through and identifying materials, resource constraints, and they're working to rectify those issues. It is usually during this phase that POs are issued for materials, contractors, and so on and so forth to make sure they arrive in time for the scheduled start date. From there, we get to the 4-week schedule. And this is the tactical schedule, and where we have exact dates and times of the planned outage. It's really where the alignment between maintenance and operations become apparent. Because when you're looking at a 4-week production plan, you can see maintenance outages on different processors, lines, or assets on their actual schedule. That's where you might be having a conversation to fill in those various, to move some of those around based on operational needs. And at this point, the schedule is really refined based on manpower, material, and prioritization. If corrective work is becoming more of a priority because something's failing quicker than we expected, then we can go through and move that around. At this point, too, we're going to start kitting all the parts required for the work. And depending upon where you are in this 4-week schedule, you'll have 60 to 80% filled with work. This is a key from this schedule is what we're going to use to drive our weekly meetings, to drive our weekly schedule. Now, when we get to our weekly schedule, we're really focused on the last week of that 4-week schedule. It should be a snippet. So we should be filled to approximately 80% of available resource capacity at that point. And then we're going to use our weekly scheduling meetings to fill in that last 20%. Now, we do schedule for 100% of available resources, and we'll talk about that on the next slide. Now, if we have overtime as well, we're going to fill that time up with work as well. This 100%, moving from the 80 to 100% capacity, is filled based on prioritizations and in addition to a weekly planning and scheduling meeting, or work that's pulled from a backlog if not enough is prioritized. At this point, we're going to confirm those outage dates and make sure everything's good. But approximately 3 days before this schedule is going to start, a schedule review is taking place as well to ensure that none of the dates or outage times have moved, none of the priorities have changed based on something failing quicker than we expected, production changes, and so on and so forth. Once this is finalized after that last meeting, we're going to hand it off to the maintenance supervisor or coordinator, depending on who's coordinating the day-to-day work of the maintenance technicians. Now, typically this isn't the planner or scheduler because they're focused on the future. So once we hand that off, it goes to execute. Now, to just reiterate that point, once we hand this off, it goes to the maintenance scheduler or maintenance supervisor or coordinator. We do that so the planner and scheduler can focus on the future work. If they're busy micromanaging day-to-day schedules, updating the weekly schedule, they won't have time to properly plan and schedule work for the next week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks out, and so on and so forth. So it's vital that once this weekly schedule is developed and it moves to the execute phase, it's handed off to the maintenance supervisor or coordinator. Now, quick poll. How much time do you schedule for your crews? Is it 100% of crew time or available resource time? Is it 80, 60, 50, less than 50? What do you actually schedule in your day-to-day activities?
Just waiting here, Mel. Hey, James, just to give me a couple more seconds here and I'll share the results.
Yep.
And hopefully you can see that. So it's 100% of available resources. We have 18% of the respondents doing that. 30% say the scheduling to 80%, a quarter to 60%, and the balance to 50% or less.
Okay. Excellent. Now, a lot of organizations that I've worked with in the past, they are somewhere around the 60 to 80% because they have so many breakdowns and so on and so forth. But I want to mention what scheduling really is about. And this particular topic here is often debated as well. Now, for those of you that aren't scheduling from 100%, I would encourage you to, even though you may lose 10, 20, 30% for breakdowns, and we'll talk about why. So, Parkinson's law is the main reason. Now, if you haven't heard of Parkinson's law, what it says is work will expand to fill the time allotted. So what that basically means is if we hand out 6 hours worth of work and we don't have breakdowns, that 6 hours of work will take 8 hours. Same thing happens at home. I'll give you an example. So if I have a honey to-do list on a Saturday morning and I don't plan it, I don't schedule it, then what happens is I'll wake up Saturday morning and I'll putz and I'll do 1 or 2 jobs that probably could have been done in reality in 30, 40 minutes. They may take 2, 3 hours. Parkinson's law is expanding that time to fill how much time I have to do it. Now, if I actually took the time Friday night to figure out what I needed to do, built my list of things to do and so on and so forth, I'd probably get a lot more done. All right? So that is Parkinson's law at work. It's work will expand to fill the time allotted. And this can be overcome by setting those goals and developing that schedule. And let's face it, that's what scheduling really is. It's setting goals for the week. So if you're not scheduling for 100%, I would highly encourage you to do so. Now, if you look at best practice metrics from, say, SMRP, nowhere in there do they say 100% schedule compliance. Nowhere in there do they say 100% of time is spent on planned work. They don't. It's less than that. But when you schedule, you want to schedule for 100%, and if you don't have any breakdowns, you have a lot of work to continue chugging along and making sure we're driving maximum utilization of our workforce. Now, it is better to push for more work than to expect less. And if you have breakdowns, what we do is we drop the lowest priority work on that schedule to accommodate that breakdown or that break-in. Now, we need to make sure we define what is a break-in or breakdown or emergency work order to make sure that's not abused. But we just drop those lowest priority works to accommodate that new work. This allows us to get it done as much as possible. So, if you're not scheduling for 100%, I highly encourage you to do so. Now, once we have that 100% schedule, we have the daily schedule. And this is, very, very controversial at times, but most schedules, we don't identify who at what time is going to do what more than 24 hours in advance. Because let's face it, things change dramatically at our facilities. We have people calling in sick. We have equipment breaking. We have changes in production priorities, changes in maintenance priorities. So if we build out a daily schedule more than 24 hours in advance, chances are we're going to be changing it. Now, in addition, building out that 24-hour schedule is typically left to a maintenance coordinator or supervisor to manage that day-to-day work. They know the people, they know the skills, and the issues and things that are going on within your facility. That's why we let them have the authority, the autonomy to change that schedule as things come up within the organization and work with that schedule to get as much accomplished given all those changing priorities. Now, we're talking about the daily schedule, but we don't measure our performance on a day-to-day basis. We typically measure it week to week. If you look at SMRP best practice guidelines, it talks about weekly schedule compliance, percentage planned work across the week, not an individual day, because those things are so fluid. So we want to make sure the maintenance supervisor or coordinator has the ability to flex what work's being done throughout the course of the week to drive ultimately the most work completed at the end of that week. Once we have that 24-hour schedule, it will look something like this. we'll see who's doing what work, when, and so on and so forth, all right? So this is a very simple day-to-day schedule, as you can see for Monday, June 19th. This is what the supervisor will build and hand out to the individual crafts or use to direct the work of the craft technicians. This approach, by allowing the supervisor to manage the day-to-day, usually drives the lowest cost with the highest uptime because we can flex, better accommodate site priorities, and get the most work done. Now, one of the key things I mentioned a few times is prioritization, and it all starts with prioritization. So I want you to consider two different scenarios. A senior manager has a pet project and is pushing to have it completed this week at all costs, including not doing PMs or predictive maintenance activities. How do you know what work is most important? And how will others in the organization? So within that scenario, do we drop the PMs to complete the project? I would say no, but that's up to the individual organizations based on their needs. The other scenario, we have two pieces of equipment that display high levels of vibration. Both require the same part, but we only have one in stock. Which equipment has the corrective work scheduled first, and could you justify that decision if the other equipment fails before the additional part arrives? I'm willing to guess that we would have a hard time justifying that decision in that scenario. This is why having a defined prioritization process is so important at all different levels of the scheduling process. It removes the ambiguity, personal feelings from the decision-making process. It ensures that the business priorities are completed over personal interests. Now, proper prioritization is what makes the 5 levels of scheduling work in the ever-changing environment. Being flexible and using rule-based prioritization will ensure business needs are always considered and we schedule the right work first. So how do we actually achieve that? Well, prioritization should take place during a daily maintenance meeting. This meeting is attended by the planner scheduler and the maintenance supervisor and possibly an operations supervisor. It's during this time that all new work requests are reviewed as well as feedback from all the preventative and predictive maintenance activities. By having a few different perspectives on the work, it can ensure that the work is prioritized in an unbiased manner against defined criteria, which we'll look at in a moment. This daily maintenance meeting should be held early in the day and should not exceed 30 minutes. By having it early in the day, it allows the maintenance supervisor to address any emergency work that slipped through the cracks and made it to the planning process. Because remember, the planner scheduler focuses on future work. They're not working on emergency work. Therefore, we're going to hand it off to the maintenance supervisor to execute right away. The daily maintenance meeting uses a strategic approach to prioritizing work by placing work into large buckets such as 4 to 16 weeks, 2 to 4 weeks, less than 14 days, less than 2 days. This enables the 5 levels of scheduling. Now, some of the benefits of having this daily meeting is the maintenance supervisor identifies any emergency work that needs to be addressed, and they can get it done. They're also provided with an awareness of upcoming work that may be coming down the pipeline 1 or 2 weeks out, so they're kept in the loop of everything going on. For the planner, it really guides what work needs to be planned first and separates the work that will not be planned because it's an emergency. It prevents them from wasting their time on that. And then from the scheduler, it allows them to build a schedule 2 to 16 weeks in advance, which allows them to reduce the time it takes to build the schedule Friday afternoon for the weekend and upcoming week. It also provides the scheduler with awareness of any plant changes, allowing next week's scheduler to schedule 3 weeks out to be manipulated based on the needs of the plant, such as equipment condition is getting worse, additional vacation times being taken, whatever may be going on within the facility. So, how do you prioritize work? Well, typically, in most organizations I work with, they either have a rule-based system, all right? Very defined, here's how we prioritize work. They have flowcharts and so on and so forth. Others use a ranking index of maintenance expenditures. What is the work priority code times the asset criticality code? The highest risk priority number is what gets scheduled first. Others use a squeaky wheel approach. Whoever complains the most gets their work scheduled first. And lastly, some use the arguments or discussions approach where whoever yells the loudest gets their work, or whoever has rank pulls that to get their work done first. But there is a better way than the last two, and that is moving to a rule-based approach to ensure the organization is aligned with the priorities of the organization. So here's a simple decision tree that we have used in the past. First question is it corrective work or project work? If it's project work, we're going to go ahead and schedule that for 4 to 16 weeks out. If it's corrective work, though, we're going to start asking some questions to see how serious that corrective work is. Is it a significant risk to environmental health, safety, quality? If the answer is yes, we're going to schedule for less than 2 days. That could be a major outage, could be a major production issue as well. If it's not a significant risk, but it is still a risk to one of those, we're going to schedule for less than 14 days out. And if it's not a risk to those yet, but it could potentially lead to a risk, then we're going to schedule for 2 to 4 weeks out. Anything after that would just fall in for between 4 to 16 weeks. Now, there needs to be definitions behind what is a significant risk, what is a potential risk, and these timelines may change based on your facility and your organization. But what this allows us to do is use a rule-based approach when we look at any single work request coming into the system to roughly schedule when that's going to happen. That's how we start to build our 4-week and our 16-week schedule. We start slotting in work in there with high-level time estimates, and we refine it as those job plans are built as we get into the weekly schedule. Now, for those using SAP, you don't have to pick a specific day. You could use your maintenance plan number. That way, you can identify, week 52 of 2018 is when we're going to do this and kind of slot it into those high-level buckets that way. You may also notice that there's no PMs on here or predictive maintenance activities. That's because they are assumed to be a high priority and will go on the schedule regardless. Because if we're not doing that proactive work, we're not going to eliminate or reduce the corrective work that's coming in. So where does prioritization fail? Well, it fails in a lot of places. Sometimes the process is just not followed. We may have a prioritization system, we may use a RIME system, but it's not followed. The daily maintenance meeting is not being had. People aren't attending. They're not going through all the new work requests, so we lose a lot of traction with it that way. Some organizations leave it just to the planner, and that doesn't work because we need that cross-functional buy-in to the prioritization process. Some organizations have an ad hoc prioritization process where, sometimes it's left up to whoever's putting that request, and chances are it's going to be emergency if that's the only way we do it. And then lastly, if we're not implementing on a consistent basis. So prioritization needs to be used consistently in the same way, regardless of who's doing it. If one planner is doing it different than another, we're going to have issues with that. The last thing regarding prioritization and why it fails is even if we do have that rule-based system or that RIME system, we need that approved by the cross-functional leadership. So it's not just maintenance, but it's maintenance, operations, health and safety, finance. They all buy in on that. So that way, when a decision is made using that process, everyone accepts it without argument. Now, if you don't do well at prioritization, or you haven't in the past, what typically happens is people start to put everything as an emergency. And this is because they view the maintenance backlog as the black hole where work orders go to die and never come back from. So if we prioritize properly, we will slowly reverse or revise the view of that black hole of maintenance. Now, one of the key things with scheduling is partnership is paramount. You have to be able to work well with operations, and that daily prioritization meeting is not enough to do it. We need to have them involved in the schedule, and we need to manage that schedule and communicate that schedule. Now, communication is critical, and it can come in many different forms. So we talked about the first primary meeting, which is the daily prioritization meeting. There's typically 2 more, a weekly scheduling meeting and a schedule review meeting that we use with operations to get their buy-in. So the weekly scheduling meeting is held early in the week, on Monday or Tuesday. It involves the key stakeholders from operations. And what we're going to do is we're going to give them a preview of 80% of the upcoming week's work based on our 4-week schedule. Then we're going to use them to help build the remaining 20%. So we're going to ask, what is your priority work? We're going to review that against the prioritization criteria we have. We're going to finalize those specific times for outages with operations and validate them. what we really want to do is we want to pull them in and make them part of the process. Now, one of the things that I've seen with these types of meetings is they have all these stakeholders come in and they sit around for 2 hours in this meeting, but they only really need to be there for about 15 minutes. So what we've seen in the past is you might do a preview of the 80% schedule by sending that out in advance and then slotting times for the individual stakeholders to come in. So processing might come in from 9 to 9:15, shipping might come in from 9:15 to 9:30, and so on and so forth. That way they're only giving up a small bit of their time to help build that schedule. Now, sometimes in order to build support for the scheduling process and to build that partnership, sometimes we do have to put in work that is not the most or the highest priority work. And, as long as it's less than 5 or 10% of the overall workload, I think that's okay, because we're building the support, building that partnership, and gaining support from operations for the scheduling process. One other thing this allows us to do is it allows operations to bring up emergencies that they just noticed. And while it doesn't give us a tremendous amount of time to plan, it still gives us a little bit of time to plan for next week, as opposed to doing it as an emergency next week. Then the final meeting from the scheduling process is the final schedule review, usually taking place on a Thursday or Friday before the schedule starts. It's a final review to make sure nothing has changed from the production plan and no last minute emergencies arose. We're going to do a final confirmation on those outages, and at this point we're going to lock in our schedule, and this is what we're going to manage our performance for. We're going to look at percent planned time spent on work, how much time we spent on corrective, breakdown, or proactive work, schedule compliance, PM compliance, those sorts of things. We're going to use those measures to drive our performance. Now, one thing on reinforcing the partnership between operations and maintenance is we're going to use that 52-week schedule to align expectations around planned downtime for the year. Once again, 4 weeks at 4 hours a week, 1 hour a week, 4 hours every other week, whatever the case is, but we're going to use that to align expectations and gain some support. We're going to use that weekly scheduling meeting to address the operational concerns. Like I said, using that last 20% in the schedule and allowing operations to build that so they have buy-in to the schedule is critical. Use that final lock-in schedule review meeting to finalize that integrated schedule with operations. Make sure the outages are on the production plan at that point. One other key thing is to manage the backlog. Don't allow work to age in the backlog too long. If we do, we'll get that black hole of maintenance piece. One of the ways organizations do this is they provide a factor in their RIME index that increases the risk priority number for work that ages too long. If you want to see an example of that, let me know and I'll be happy to share it with you after the presentation. If work is another piece from the backlog standpoint, if work isn't going to be completed or it's going to be delayed, make sure you provide feedback to the requester. The part required to do this is going to be 6 weeks out. Let them know so they're not wondering or just assuming that it went to the black hole. Right? One key thing. If maintenance is responsible for overrunning an outage, we said we were going to start up at 3 and we didn't start up till 4, accept responsibility, do a root cause analysis, and determine what can be done in the future. If you just make excuses, operations will be less likely to give us that equipment to do that work. One of the key things that I've heard from operations groups in the past is that we don't want to give maintenance the outage time because they never hit the timeline and start up on time. And if they don't hit that timeline, they never understand why and they never do anything to prevent it. So I'd rather just not give them the time at all. So if you overrun an outage, understand why, put in some preventative and corrective actions to prevent it from happening again in the future. Now, the one thing you want to do with this whole process is use metrics to drive performance. Now, most CMMSs, you can run some reports. Some are lucky and have nice dashboards that allow you to understand how your work management process is operating. But in this graphic from Sockeye, you can see it has a lot of KPIs built into the dashboard. You can see how many available hours are used, what's our schedule compliance and work orders, how much time are we spending on reactive and preventative and corrective work, all those different things. We want to use those to drive performance. Now, if you don't have performance measures in place for your plan and scheduling process, there's 4 I want you to use or start using. Schedule adherence is the key one. What percentage of work orders did we get done over the week that we said we were going to do? What was our PM compliance? While related to schedule adherence, it's different. We want to understand how well we're doing at our preventative maintenance compliance, preventative maintenance being a bucket for inspections, predictive maintenance, lubrication, those sorts of things. We want to understand our backlog. What is our planned ready backlog? Is it 2 to 4 weeks like we want it to be? Is our total backlog 4 to 6 weeks? We want to understand that, because if we don't have enough work, we can't schedule properly. Lastly, we want to look at how much time we're spending on planned work versus unplanned or reactive work. All right? Those are the 4 key ones we want to look at when we're starting off with the work management process and implementing scheduling. Now, last poll, Charles, if you will. Poll, do you think scheduling tools you have in place can be improved?
Bear with me, James. Overwhelming here. Bear with me. Overwhelming, it's 90% are saying yes.
And that is typical. Many of the tools within SAP, Maximo, and many of the other CMMSs do not do a good job. So I urge you to consider looking at something different that may work. And there's lots of options out there, Sockeye being one of them. Look at something that will help you drive this process, make it streamlined, make it easier. The more you can automate from a scheduling standpoint, the better you'll be, because then you can manage those exceptions, you can deal with those issues that arise and not worry about the norm and the routine stuff on a consistent basis. Now, some of the common issues with implementing the 5 levels of maintenance scheduling, or just being good at maintenance scheduling in general, is there's a lack of alignment around prioritization. So as we talked about, define your prioritization criteria, get it signed off by senior site leadership from a cross-functional group. That way everyone is aligned with what we need. The PDF of this presentation is available in the sidebar. Take that decision flow chart and change the definitions and the timelines to suit your organization to get started if you're not using anything. Lack of adherence to the maintenance outages is another one. Not just from a maintenance standpoint of handing the equipment back when it's supposed to, but from operations, handing it off when it should be. One of the things that we implemented within an organization initially when we started this was looking at maintenance outages started on time, maintenance outages completed on time. So how often did we get it from operations on time, and how often did we hand it back on time? We started looking at those, and as those numbers were not very good initially, we started working to improve those. Poor startup after an outage is a major issue. So even though we did all the work, we went to start up, and now our maintenance guys are quote-unquote teaking for the next couple hours. That's a major issue for operations. So you can address that through having good commissioning activities, having good job plans is critical to preventing that. If you don't have that leveled recurring work that we looked at in the 52-week schedule, you're going to be juggling PMs and work orders and everything else every week, and you're not going to have time to do the prioritization properly, schedule the work properly, and those sorts of things. Lastly, not following the scheduling process. Having maybe not the 5 levels of scheduling, maybe you only have 3, but whatever the case is, make sure you follow that process, it's documented, and that's what you use to build your schedule every week. And lastly, you're scheduling work before it's ready. And what I mean before it's ready is meaning you don't have a job plan, you don't have labor estimates, you don't have parts ordered and verified on site, those sorts of things. If you continue to do that, you're going to lose buy-in for the whole process from a lot of different people. Operations, your maintenance techs, and so on and so forth. Now, what type of values do the 5 levels bring? Well, in one organization, we had an increase of 10% schedule adherence to greater than 80% consistently over the year. We were able to drive PM compliance to greater than 95%. We were able to maintain a consistent level of backlog, and that's important because you need 2 to 4 weeks of planned ready backlog to schedule properly. We were able to improve communication and trust between operations and maintenance. we built that 52-week schedule. We worked with production plan. We got those schedules aligned. We got the expectations aligned. And having them involved in building not only that 52-week schedule, but the week-to-week schedule, filling in the last 20% of work, we were able to get their buy-in and support for the scheduling process. And they soon stopped putting everything as an emergency work priority because they understood how the system worked and that we would do the work based on proper priorities, and that they could help escalate things if needed. Now, if you don't want to improve, you don't want the benefits of planning and scheduling, you don't want high PM levels of compliance, and you want operations to continue to be mad at you, frustrated with the work you do, or you want to be a firefighter and continue running from failure to failure, then by all means, do not look at the 5 levels of scheduling. But in your maintenance and reliability journey, in my opinion, you need work management, so planning and scheduling, spare parts management as a foundation to drive anything else. If you don't have good work management or parts management, you can have the best predictive maintenance program or best vibration program, and you may not get the parts, get the work plan scheduled and executed before that failure occurs. So focus on work management, the 5 levels of scheduling, spare parts management to drive your program forward. So, in closing, what's stopping you from implementing the 5 levels of maintenance scheduling? It's not easy, but the benefits are there, not just from we're going to get more work done, but also from a buy-in from operations and senior leadership on our maintenance and reliability journey. It will not happen overnight. This is a long-term play. When we implemented this across the organization, it took months of work to get this in place and moving. From there required additional time to get it refined where we're actually consistently delivering very good performance. So I ask you to think to yourselves, what's stopping you from implementing these 5 levels? Is it resources? Is it having a structured process? Is it having poor technology? Not being able to schedule your CMMS? Whatever the case is, think about that. If you have questions on any of the specific activities, feel free to reach out to myself or Charles, and we can definitely talk to you about what you can do differently, what may work or may not work in your organization based on what we've seen across all the different industries and organizations we work with. So with that, I want to thank you guys for attending, and if you have any questions, please feel free to throw them in the chat box or email me. Or get in contact with me on LinkedIn, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you have.
Well, thank you very much, James. I'm not seeing any questions in the question box here, but as Jay said, kindly follow up. I understand my intro, the audio wasn't that great. The contact information for both James and myself is in the slideshow presentation. And again, thank you very much for participation in the webinar. Really appreciate it, and I hope it was helpful. And James, I think with that, we can probably close it off, unless there are any questions. I think we're good. Well, goodbye, everybody. Thanks again.
All right. Thank you.